All right, so today we have the pleasure of having Joe Olson, three-time Star Wars CCG world champion, and he's been playing this game for a very long time. We'll get into that more, but thank you, Joe, for being with us. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this.
Absolutely. So, 2025, how do you feel about Star Wars CCG? Are you still playing Star Wars CCG? I know you played last year. How do you feel about the game? What do you like? What do you don't like? How do you feel?
I Star Wars. It's funny because like whenever you go to some social event or whatever, people are always like, "Oh, what are your hobbies?" And I always kind of lead with like, "All right, well, this is going to be the nerdiest thing you've ever heard, but I play this dead card game from 20 years ago that's based on the Star Wars franchise." It's like, and I go into this whole spiel. Um, and and it's great because I mean honestly like everybody thinks it's like amazing. Everyone's like I don't know if it's the way I present it or what, but everyone's like, oh man, that sounds really cool. Like they're people are just supportive in general in life, I found. But like uh, just the fact that we are still playing this game that's dead shows a couple things. One, how good the game is. I mean, it's just like strategically, like whenever I try any other card games, like Swoop, for example, they just seem so basic. It's like, here's your ground stuff, here's your space stuff. They're all at one location basically. And Star Wars, it's like there's this huge expanse of locations, and you can be undercover, and you can do attack run. It's just like such a complex game. It's incredible. So yeah, I still love the game. I love playing it. And then the other aspect I tell people, of course, when I'm explaining this is like, because it's been dead for so long, we occasionally get new players or we get players who come back. But otherwise, there's this big group of players who have just played for decades and we all know each other. And so when we get together to play the game, it's like it's friendly and we're all hanging out. It's more like a high school reunion than it is like some big competitive. So there's that competition there. We want to win, but it's really friendly competition. So it's great. I love it. I am still playing. I missed the last major because I was traveling, but otherwise I went to the one before that. I'll be at the next one. I go to pretty much all of them. And yeah, I think the game has a lot going for it. The PC is doing a great job, and I mostly play open. So with all the virtual cards, so I think the PC is doing a great job developing that and tweaking it as necessary. But retro is just a fun thing to play as well. Just yeah, a great game.
Absolutely. No, and one thing I get consistently, like I talk with Chu, I talk with Sokol, I talk with Hayes. All of you all are very, grateful for the PC. I'm not hearing any like naggers, and I guess no one wants to be a nagger, right? Anything, but no, I think it's great. Obviously, you've been here a long time. I guess you wouldn't be here if you didn't, you didn't like it. I guess we've had some attrition for the years. I don't know if you have any kind of feeling about that. You played here a long time. Like where would you say kind of openness today compared to was like 5, 10, 15 years ago? How do you see it now?
Yeah, we definitely have attrition. I think it's sort of gone in cycles, and people get into periods of life where they get married and have young kids and step away from the game. We do see a lot of people come back. They'll come and be like, oh, I haven't played in a few years. Sometimes, I haven't played in 20 years. I just rediscovered this. But then also like, oh, someone we may not they may drop off for 2, 4, 6 years, and then suddenly it's like, oh, hey, you're back. How's it going? Um, and also there's stuff like the pandemic happened and that caused a huge spike in interest because we're all quarantined, and GIMP came along and got completely coded just a year or two before, and so that was an amazing resource while we're stuck inside. And so that caused a huge spike, and it's drifted down a little bit since then. And it comes and goes with how people feel about the game itself, the particular current meta, I mean. But yeah, there's generally always this sort of core group of players that are playing.
Nice. All right. So, and is the Worlds for 2025, has that been decided yet? Are you going to there? Is that going to be a thing, or how's that going?
I am going, and the reason it well not the I would probably go no matter where because I went when it was in Germany last year, but I'm definitely going because it is in Seattle for the first time ever, and I live in Seattle, so it's going to be local to me, which is super exciting.
That's awesome.
It will
All
be,
right.
oh, for anyone watching this, if it is before October of 2025, if you're watching this, it will be the first weekend of October, and you should absolutely come. Even if you've never been to one, everyone will be super happy to have you and show you the ropes, anything you need. Let you borrow cards if you don't have cards, anything like that is very welcoming, friendly community.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And so I guess you've been in Seattle for a while because I think both you and Teacher are from Washington, I believe, Charlie Hickey.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess you grew up and you never moved away kind of thing, or how did that go for you?
I left to California for college, and then I was a teacher in Vegas for 8 years. And then my now ex-wife and I retired, and we traveled the world for a few years. So had a kid born in Istanbul and another one born in Amsterdam, and then settled back here to be near my family while the kids are young. So not entirely accurate to say I never left, but I did come back.
That's cool. No, I get no, absolutely no young children or even medium, medium aged children in families. No, I totally understand. I did a similar move. I moved to California a bit and then kind of moved to Michigan for a little while to be with my, late wife's family. Makes a big difference. So very cool. Very cool with that. So obviously, you are the first Star Wars CCG person to be world champion 3 times. So that's pretty cool. There've been a couple of
No, Bastion. No, I'm the
Bastion.
third to be 3 times.
Oh, Bastion's
Bastion three
also three
times
times.
and
Okay.
Desai 3 times, and now
Okay.
me. So now it's a race to four. We'll
Okay.
see.
All right. So how does that feel? It's in your home turf. Does that give you a home advantage, kind of thing?
I don't know. I don't think so because we've had a number of other majors here. The Indoor Grand Prix was one run here for a number of years in a row, and I never won that one. So I actually haven't won a Seattle major for a few decades.
And how do you kind of approach it? Obviously, obviously you think you won 2021, 2023, 2024. So is the current rate,
Well,
go ahead.
not 2020, which was
Oh,
the online worlds, 21 and 24.
okay. Sorry, apologies.
That's right.
So obviously the meta, how fast is the meta changing year to year in the kind of the modern era, the post reset era? Like how much can you reuse old decks versus you kind of have to kind of go back to basics ish again?
Um, I feel like it changes fairly slowly. There's a couple sets per year, but there's usually only a few impactful cards in there, so you might get a new deck or two. Um, they'll do kind of a big wave of erratas every few years that massively change things. So that's probably the biggest change is it'll be like they'll take a lot of the top decks and just cut off the top of the power curve to make a lot more things viable. But it's I would say more of the meta change is due to natural, this is popular, so I'm going to play this type of deck, but now what beats that? The same that you would see in retro. So, for example, at the latest major, two of the most popular decks were Rescue the Princess Virtual for light side and a Walker's Blow Up the Generator deck for dark side. And both of those decks have been around for a while, and neither of them were very popular, and neither of them got a particular amount of help in the latest set preview or anything. It's just they kind of were on the back burner, and people started playing with them a little more. And but I don't expect either of them to be that huge in a year because I think people will learn how to beat them and what's effective against them. And so a lot of it's just natural meta shifting the way any game has.
Okay. And I get and I guess how do you like approach kind of like, preparing for the new kind of the new tournaments, new worlds, etc. Because Hayes said he has like team five. He has his like this posse crew that do decks. I think in the olden days it was much more solo, less team based. I guess you had the regionals, right? I don't, and I think you traveled like to DecipherCon 2000 with Teacher. Obviously you travel together. Maybe you can kind of talk about that. Like, how does that compare back then to today versus kind of like deck building teams, that kind of thing?
I think back in the day, there were the people who had the teams had a huge advantage. And I think if you look at the people who had success, so there was like Team Albany, right? And they
Right.
all worked together. And Chu was really good because of that, and Sokol won Worlds in 2000 because of that. And Sokol immediately, gave huge credit to his team, the Twigs and Kingery, and or you had people like Clint Hayes and Stephen Lewis teaming up. You had, Bastion had the Germans, and so they would. In fact, Bastion's always been a fairly solo guy, but still, Marcus Wurst, and they came together to Worlds 2000 and prepped together. You had, Martin Falk, and so they would. So we didn't talk as much about teams back then, but it was the people who were teaming up and testing together that I think saw the most success back then. And so over time, that sort of just become codified, where there's a lot of teams nowadays that just it is really hard to do it all on your own, and especially nowadays with Gem, the fact that you can share replays is amazing. So I don't have to do all of the work on all of the matchups, so I'm on team 5 as well with Hayes, and Hayes and Jeff, another person on our team, can go and play a bunch of games and just post the replays, and I can just hit play and then click the speed it up button to watch it on the fastest speed, and in 2 minutes I can just buzz through and watch a whole match and go, oh, okay, I saw how the flow of that match goes. I kind of know some lines now that I might take. So I think, pairing up with people is a huge advantage. But no, back in the day, I was, I think I did one playtest session for that Worlds 2000 there was this guy named Mike McCallion, who was friends with Charles. And we all went over to his house and we did this playtest session. But otherwise, I played with my best friend at the time. We were both, 14 years old, and, we'd do these sleepovers fueled by Mountain Dew, and we'd watch Cool Runnings and play Star Wars cards all night and just come up with goofy bad decks. And it wasn't until I started working with other people in the mid 2000s when my game took a leap to another level. And part of that is just when you play with good people, the iron sharpens iron thing. They make good plays and you see that and you learn from it, you make good plays against them, you just have better games. Versus if you just go on and you play some random and they're making tons of mistakes, it causes you to just play sloppy. And I think it's hugely beneficial to get some friends and really purposefully try and make each other better. If that's your goal. If your goal is just, I'm having fun, I'm playing my pet deck, that's fantastic. More power to you. But in terms of if you wanted to get better, I think finding people who share a similar goal is important.
That's a cool point. And so kind of like Sokol kind of crediting, kind of friendship with Shu and the Twilligers, do you think that was kind of like, if you weren't on team 5, you might not have, had so much success in the previous years, would you say? Or
yeah, oh, absolutely. And a lot of credit to Hayes. Hayes is, I think, the best ever at reading metas and figuring out what decks and what tech cards should be played to do really well. Play testing with these guys. Phil is another world champion on our team, and just incredible deck builder, thinks about the game just differently. Hayes' brother Eric Hunter is one of the most creative people, and so and that's the other thing is diversity is sort of a bad word for some people these days, but just having this diverse amount of minds coming at it from different angles and discussing it, you just end up hashing out something so much better than you would if you just had one person noodling on it.
no, I agree. The diversity of decks, thoughts, opinions, absolutely no argument there. So obviously you're playtesting, with your team 5, this group of guys, iron sharpens iron, helps you a bit better. How does it come to? Because Hayes is still playing the tournament. I'm assuming the other players you mentioned are still playing. So how does it work when you're testing decks and metas, but then, now they're frenemies, right? Now you might have to face them in competition. Like, do you give if you say too much, maybe they'll get a clue and you might have to fight them later. You want to keep information back. How do you share with your team, but keep things back because you have to use your own tricks, or how does that work?
I think this is the one area where Team 5 is different from most teams. So in general, in the community, we're teammates, we're friends until we get to the board, and then it's every man for himself. And may the best man win. We all want to win. Um, for us, and for me in particular, I've won enough that it's just not that important to me. Like I want to win. When I go, I play to win, but I also enjoy seeing my friends succeed. So there was this. I made the top eight of worlds in after the reset in 2015. In 2016, I was in Australia, so I didn't go. And in 2017, I'll get to 2018 in a minute. And 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So I made it every year except 1 year I didn't attend, and then 2018. And what happened in 2018 is I was 5-2, and another teammate and friend of mine, Steven Salucci, was also 5-2, and we were paired up the last game, and we sat down, and and he was stressing because it was going to be a stressful game against each other and whatever. And I said, "Hey, congratulations on your day 3. Let's go get some food." And he like teared up. He was like, "Really? Like no, you can't." And I was like, "Yeah, you got it. I can see you advance." I had been in day 3s plenty of times. Like I had never won worlds by that point, but it didn't matter. I had been there. I wanted him to have a shot to go, and it was great. It was like he anyway. I would not go back and change that. I have no problem like conceding to a friend and rooting them on. Some people think no, they should have to earn it or whatever. To my mind, if I concede to him there and then he the next day goes and beats every single player he plays, he earned it. So yeah, in general, it's most people are like, no, they're gonna win no matter what, and not out of some sort of selfishness thing, but that's because we're playing a competitive game. Um, for Hayes and I both have conceded to each other or to other people on our team because the primary reason I'm playing is not to win. It's a secondary reason.
Secondary reason. Uh, can you share the secondary reason, publicly? Is that okay to share?
I was just saying the primary reason is not to win. The primary reason is to go and have fun, have connection and community with my friends and that sort of thing. And so winning is secondary among many other things. Sharpening my brain is a secondary reason. So if winning was the most important thing, then I would go and never concede. But I'm happy a lot of times to just go see my friends and root for them.
Awesome. No, I love that. So I think you had a 2021 interview with Kindlecast, and I guess you said you won in 2020, 2021. I don't know if you had this interview before or after 2020, but regardless, you said you were still learning things. So obviously it's 2025. You won one more World Championship, 2024. Do you recall, or can you remember to your mind what you learned? Are you still learning Star Wars, or is there anything else like since 2020, since that interview, you think you've learned that you could share with us?
Yeah, I definitely think I've learned a lot since then. I think there's a lot more. So I'll try to be specific because it's always annoying when someone's vague. But I think I'm better at tracking. I think I'm better at understanding board state, game state, in order to make decisions to maximize win probability. And thinking more about the game in terms of upside of individual plays as well as lines and also like flexibility between different plays. I think I'm much better at reading metas and understanding decks. I think these are all perpetual skills that I'm working on. And yeah, I feel like the game, the other thing is there's just like so many different decks. And the way I think of it, the analogy I use is I picture like a staircase and I picture all of the different decks, court and watch your step and bring them before me, whatever. And I picture them somewhere on that staircase. And the top of the staircase is like, I've mastered this deck, I could win a major with it. And the bottom is like, I don't know what this deck does. If my opponent sat down with it, I'd have to read every card, right? And your mastery of every one of these decks is somewhere on that staircase. And this deck, maybe you've used it a few times, so you're a little familiar, so it's kind of towards the lower. And this one, you've played it a bunch, but so they're all somewhere on there. And what happens is, as you practice a deck, hopefully it moves a little bit up the staircase. But over time, because of entropy, they sort of slide down the staircase too. Because what happens is you get a little bit out of practice with it, and you maybe forget a little interaction, or a new card comes out and that affects the deck, either something that could be in your opponent's deck or something that you could have added into yours, or that you add in but you don't quite know all the interactions yet, or the meta shifts, so now there's a new deck you don't know the lines against, so it's a little lower in the staircase. So it's sort of this perpetual fight against entropy. If you want to be good with a broad range of decks, you need to keep up practice with them. You need to keep them higher up on that staircase. So even just playing in the last 4 years is like, I just won a major in January with Watch Your Step, and but I also played that in the 2020 online worlds in the in-between weekend. And so it's this deck that's sort of perpetually good, whether that's in a retro format or maybe not perpetually good, but sort of always comes back up around. And so it's a deck that I recommend people learn if they're not familiar or good with it. And retro is a great place to practice that too, because it is good in retro. So sometimes it's not fun practicing a deck that's not good in open for a future time, because then you're just losing a bunch with it, and then you don't know where you're going wrong. Is it because I'm playing it wrong, or is it because it's just not a strong deck? But it's one that's like, you should go ahead and go learn this deck, because at some point it will be good again. And so just having that practice, having that backlog of information and decks higher up on the staircase gives a big benefit. And so that's something also that, going back to your question of like, what have I learned, is just to continually practice and widen my range in those decks, to have all those available for whatever the meta is.
I like that point. So basically, if a deck is higher in the staircase, if something is kind of a good deck, objectively or mostly objectively, you should play with it. You should practice, even if you don't terribly like the deck, even if it's not your favorite deck. You should play with it, even if it's just to understand your knowledge of that deck better, so you can play against it. If you play as the deck, you can play against it easier. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and to clarify, the staircase is not a list of top tier, like this is tier 1, this is tier 2, it's your own personal staircase of your comfort level and how good you are and how well you understand that deck. And so probably if you didn't like a deck, it's probably not as high on your staircase just because you haven't played it as much, because we tend not to play decks we don't like as much. But if a deck is tier 1 and it's lower on your staircase, yeah, you should probably at least get a few reps with it, just so you do understand it better, so you can face against it. And a lot of times you'll discover the weaknesses of a deck when you if you keep losing to this strong deck, you're like, then you force yourself to play it a few games, and then you'll lose while playing it, and you'll go, oh, okay, that's maybe some of the weaknesses I can exploit when I'm facing it.
That makes perfect sense. And when it comes to like, kind of like test matches, test playing, I think like in some of these like top 8 formats, like you can watch your opponents playing and you can kind of see the decks they're using. You don't have their deck list, but you can kind of watch them. You know it's a locked deck or mostly locked deck. Are you like playing practice decks, before that match if you have time, or how does that tend to work? That happens maybe more online retro. Does that apply in real life too? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't personally. With 3 fairly young kids, I don't have a ton of time. If Star Wars were my career, if there was like huge money behind it, and I was trying to like, then I can see going, okay, cool. The top 8 decks are locked, and I see, I'm in the top 8 on the opposite side of the bracket as this guy. But if we met in the finals, he's going to have these 2 decks, and so I'm going to start try and recreate that and then play against it and all that. You could absolutely go to that level. I don't. I might glance and see, oh, okay, they're playing this deck, and now I just have it in. Now I know my game plan, and but I think if people were hardcore, they would practice against that. What their opponent does. But yeah, for live events, there's obviously not really that opportunity, because you're all in the same room for that day, and archetypes are posted after the first game, so you might be able to game plan a little bit in your head, but there's no time to test the game or anything.
How much time is there typically, like in kind of like a top eight scenario? Like how, like you're playing a game, people playing a game. I think Hayes said scouting's an issue, like is a thing. It's a thing, right? So how do you find about the other decks when you're the one kind of playing this local, this game here? How do you find about the other ones?
So you play the whole round of 8 plays at once, and then so we have, because we have a live stream for the viewers, it would be a huge disadvantage to the people who are streamed to basically you know um, have their deck types known and people who weren't on stream not known. And so what they do is they just post what everyone's playing, not the whole list, but the archetype after round 1. So typically what will happen is I'm playing my game, whether I'm on stream or not. And then afterwards, after my game's over, I can see the list, or someone tells me like, oh, your next opponent is playing Prophet and Hunt Down or whatever. And you might have, and how much time you might have to like think through that match completely depends on if your match went all the way to time, you might just have 5-minute break to go to the bathroom and get a drink of water, and then you're in your next game. If your match ended 30 minutes early, you might have 30 minutes until that next game, but you might not know your potential opponent until 5 minutes before. So you might be thinking, okay, it's either going to be these two decks or these two decks or whatever. If you know that because they were on stream, but you might not even know that until you're waiting to see who advances and what their deck type is. So you don't get a ton of information live. You kind of have to figure it out on the fly.
Okay. Got it. And do you think being told the deck archetype you're going to face is a good thing or bad thing? Does that change kind of the metagame of going into the game versus just being kind of a blind thing, not knowing that at all?
It absolutely changes it for a couple reasons. One, and to clarify, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It does change it. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know. It's just different.
Okay.
But one is the higher seed gets to pick which side they play first. So knowing what their opponent is on both decks helps. So in theory, it goes, well, you have to play both. And why does it matter which one you do first? But it does, because you can try and like get a big win and then grind them down. You can try and play your worst side first to try and like get as low as possible. And then you could have a deck that's a lot more just like linear without a ton of lines. It just does what it does. And then a deck that could go for a big blowout or could play safer. And so you might play your just linear deck first and see how much you win or lose by. And then if you won, take safer lines with the other deck. If you lost, you take riskier lines. So it's definitely an advantage to know what the matchups are and then be that number 1 seed. And so you can choose which you play first. Though of course that is good to have a benefit to being a number 1 seed. It's good to, especially when it's a major where you had Swiss day 1 and then match play day 2. The person who earned the higher seed was because they played better the day before, and so you give them that, they get that small benefit of then getting to choose the side. The other way it changes it is, besides choosing sides, you also know whether or not you're advantaged or disadvantaged in the next one, and typically by how much. I mean, this is all, the higher level players tend to know, all right, this deck is advantaged in this way, or, I might typically lose that game by 15, or, oh, this is going to be a close one. It could be plus or minus 5 either way, or, and so if you had no clue, and that's actually what happens in the round of 8, you have no clue what your opponent is playing for their other deck. And so it's like you might play a game and then they flip over the next deck and it's like, oh shoot, I'm really disadvantaged here. I should have played that last game riskier. I won by 5, but I could have played it riskier and maybe won by 15, which is probably what I would need because they're advantaged by like 15, and that sort of thing. So it does make a difference knowing what the matchups are. You don't know that for the round of 8, but you do for the semifinals and finals. And then that comes into play, the whole what the 1 seed is choosing, how risky you have to play. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it adds an extra level of strategy and intention to how you play the matchup and how you play that particular game. I really love match play for that reason, because it's like, it's different than just, you just need to win the game. If we're just playing one game, my deck against your deck, and you just have to win, you don't have to be doing as many interesting things like, oh, I need to, track this for on the edge, because it's like, I'm already clearly winning. I don't need to win more. But when it's like in match play, one, you do have to win more because diff matters, but two, it's like, all right, they won by 17. I need to, how can I win by 18? And then the other person be like, how can I get them below 17? And you're doing this, there's this big like interplay between that I think is very cool.
Interesting. But tell me if I'm right though. Can't you decide ahead of time? Like, I'm going to use this deck for the top 8, and then I'm going to use this deck for the top 4, and or use this deck for the top 2. Isn't that a rule? Like, you could pre-decide that, or no?
No, you're locked into decks for the entire top 8.
Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe the PDS2 term is different because the rules there are that if you wanted to say your top 4 deck or top 2 deck, you could choose that. You just can't. You have to choose it at the time of the top 8. But I don't know. I'd have to look.
Interesting. Yeah, we've done something like that. We've done a few things like that before. At 2015 SoCal Grand Prix, we were doing it all in one day, and because they did like a cube event that counted for part of your thing the day before, and then it was like everyone plays their decks, and then we're rolling into the top 4 right away, or top 8 right away, and you can keep the same decks or you can choose it, but you had to choose it like before even seeing the meta or something like that. Like, so they did a thing where you could switch, but you had to choose it ahead of time what it would be. But yeah, I think different organizers, just when they set up their tournament structure, set up different things like that. We've done different things where top 8s aren't locked. We've done ones where they're locked all the way. Yeah, it just sort of experiment around with different formats.
Do you have any preferences? Like, do you think a locked format versus an unlocked, like every deck you could, every kind of match you can change? How do you feel about those kind of different scenarios?
I tend to prefer, in terms of actually playing them and doing it, I think both are great. The only reason I tend to prefer locked decks for at least a huge chunk of it, and the reason is, so right now there's an open NPC just about to start, and its decks are locked for a round of, you pick one deck and for each side, and you're playing that for the round of 64, 32, 16. So you play that for 3 games. It has to be those 2 decks. And then you're allowed to switch and pick new decks at that point once the top 8 are set, but then it's locked for all of the top 8 semifinals and finals. So for the next 3. And one big advantage to that is you don't have the constant agonizing line in front of me of, okay, my next opponent plays this. I know they like this deck a lot, but they know that I know they like that deck, so they might switch off of it. But because they know that they like it, they might then keep it because they know that I know they might switch off of it. And so you just go through these circles, and it's called Wine in Front of Me, because it's seen in The Princess Bride, where he's like, yes, he poisons the thing and he switches it around, and he's like, and it's like, all right, and that, doing that exercise every week, where it's like, all right, my opponent knows that this is my preference of style deck, and so I should switch off of it. It gets a little tedious doing that over and over. So locking decks means you just don't have to like go through that exercise every week and decide and mentally jump through hoops and figure out what your opponents like and their preferences and that sort of thing. But changing is fun. I like playing a wide variety of decks. For one tournament last, I have probably 15 decks built for each side. And for one tournament last summer, it was Washington State's last summer. We all showed up at the card shop, and we'd all just played a big tournament the day before, the regionals. We were doing a big super weekend with regionals one day, states one day. And we all did regionals where we all played our favorite decks and, got to do that. And then for states, what we ended up doing is we took all my decks and we just dumped them upside down on the table and just randomly picked one each round. And so then everyone just played like a random deck they weren't super familiar with against someone else playing a random deck they weren't super familiar with. and played a game, and then we set those aside, and everyone picked a new random deck the next round. So they didn't even play the same deck throughout the whole tournament. It was just every game you got a new random deck from the pile, and then that was set aside. So each deck was only played once in the tournament, and so we ended up with just these matchups that you never see because they're just like not super common decks playing against another not super common deck, and weird interactions were happening, and it was a lot of fun. So I enjoy playing a whole bunch of different decks. That's kind of the downside of deck locking. You're locked into that one particular thing, but yeah, they're both good in their way.
Okay. All right. So you like them both, so no particular preference overall, you'd say.
Yeah, I like not having to stress when you lock in, but I also like being able to switch and have a wide range. So they're both, yeah, no preference.
Awesome. Okay. Um, and I think we talked a little about history, so I want to go back in time. So obviously you're playing 2020 through today, obviously. How and you talk about like sometimes people have breaks for family, and you said so you started what year, and kind of could you kind of go through like your how much when did you play, when did you take a break, that kind of thing.
I started around 97 or 98. I got one of those premier two-player starters from Toys R Us.
Yeah.
And tried it out with my best friend Josh growing up, and we barely understood the rules, and then Dagobah came out, and we bought some packs of that at our local card store that we always went to for baseball cards. Bought some Star Wars cards there. I remember reading the Tales of the Bounty Hunter book, and being like, oh man, IG88 is the best. So like I bought from their their case of single cards. I bought like IG88 and his riot gun and his neural inhibitor and his ship, and I was like, these cards are going to be amazing because IG88 is the best. And spent my allowance on that, and so started playing and just played with my friend for a few years. I think I started tournaments right around indoor in '98, and started getting good. It took a few years. I was a scrub for a number of years, and then I won Washington State's in 2000. Um, uh, I was 14, about to turn 15. I won Washington State's, and then I road trip down with Charles Hickey and a few other players to Portland, and I won the Portland Grand Slam. Um, and and so I thought I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this game. Um, and then flew out to Worlds 2000, and I just got crushed. I was not good. I for my small pond here, I was decent, but the players, I mean, they were incredible and incredibly good. So cool to be able to win that. But Hayes, Bastion, these players, yeah. I went to Worlds 2000. I was 15. So and awkward, shy introvert. So but met people, had fun. I played this hunt down deck that one of our local players who before I got good was just would terrorize everyone with this hunt down and Mino True Learns decks. His name was Douglas Harvilla, and he won a bunch of the locals. And I had lost to that deck so many times. I was like, I'm gonna play that deck. So I got the list from him very last minute, and played it. And the stupid thing was like I wasn't aware enough or play testing enough to understand like what a terrible call that was. Death Star 2 had come out in July. Or August, and Worlds was 2 months later. Honor of the Jedi just like crushes Hunt Down. Like Hunt Down was not a good deck because everyone was playing Honor. In fact, at DecipherCon 2000, they did a enhanced Jabba's Palace pre-release tournaments, and that had no escape in it because of how brutal Honor was.
Right.
The very next set, just a few months later, they printed a counter card. But of course, that wasn't available at World. So I'm playing Hunt Down, relying on Visage, and everyone's just like Honor, and so then I'm losing to Visage, and they're not. It's like the opposite of what your deck wants to be doing. But yeah, I got crushed at that Worlds. Had a lot of fun. Memories of I'm sure you've heard stories of all the DQing people for decklist errors, stories of
Yes.
the pairing software went down, so they were having to pair hundreds of people manually by hand. So we were waiting hours and taking cards and like throwing them up into the chandeliers in the ceiling in these huge, super high. So people were like throwing cards as you do, and it got silly. It was fun, but yeah, I'm in awe of the people who were good back then because it was the competition level was very high.
No, I believe 100%. And they were just throwing cards at chandelier just for fun, just to be a nuisance,
Yeah,
or what?
we were in this giant ballroom basically for hours with nothing to do because we're just like waiting for the thing to start. It started like 2 hours late, and between games pairings would take forever, and so people were just bored and just started like throwing cards, and people were seeing if they could get them into the chandeliers that were like 50 feet up, and yeah, just it was a wild day.
Okay. Yeah, I have a turn report from teacher Charles Hickey, and it sounded like you both had similar decks. You both played a hunt down, and you both
Mm.
decided you pivoted to like a hidden base mains with a lot of fallen portal. Is that what you played, or do you remember?
I actually don't remember. I think I did play a hidden mains deck. Yeah, and it used insurrection and it pulled like Tatooine Docking Bay, Spaceport Docking Bay, and it played like Ben Kenobi and some lightsabers and some sack, and yeah, it was kind of an inferior hidden mains version deck.
Okay. Um, maybe this is a good segue point. Let me share my screen here, and then we can kind of go over some of these cards a little more directly, even if we don't have the list. I'm assuming you don't have your own list. Like you would not have kept it or something like that. Is that fair to say?
I might actually. So before I switched to that hunt down deck, I had this dark deck that I liked that was like Tatooine. It was like Tatooine occupation based deck. And
Mm-hmm.
at that one playtest event that I said I went to at this guy Mike McKaylin's house,
Mm-hmm.
we I played this deck and I did fairly well with it. And then I was kind of debating, should I play this deck that I'm comfortable with? Should I switch to this hunt down that I think is stronger? And he gave me advice. He was like, play the deck you're good with, play the deck that you're comfortable with. And I ignored him and I should have listened to him. But I actually did find that list. I don't know if I have my actual the list that I played, but I found that I have like a folder from like decades ago
Hmm.
that yeah, but I wonder I might have lists from
Yeah,
back in the day I can look some.
okay, yeah, I'm curious because I found like one okay, I found like a Yavin 4 occupation deck, and he did it kind of like Rob's, right? And he was just trying to get extra drains and matching pilots.
Yeah,
Do you remember how your occupation for Tatooine worked, or is that too kind of far away for you?
I don't. I not enough to speak with clarity. I'm sure it was Twi'lek advisors to find occupation, and
Okay.
I don't remember if I think I probably started um something and then careful planning for Jabba's palace and then floated a few systems would be my guess,
Yeah,
but
that's
I'm not
the dark side version of careful planning. I know what you mean. Yeah, and you
combat readiness. Yeah,
yeah, readiness. Yeah, you're right. Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, readiness, and then Java's Palace, and then Java's Palace can pull more sites, kind of thing. And I'm guessing you weren't going for like a scum and villainy kind of thing. You were just going for like
no,
more sites, free alien if you want it kind of thing, and then control.
yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So obviously, okay, so you went there with teacher, didn't do as well as you wanted to. Now, 2021 comes up. You do make it to the retro top eight, and you obviously didn't play Hunt Down. You did not play Tatooine Occupation. You played some different decks. So your dark side, you went with an ISB Space. Can you kind of go into the thinking behind choosing this deck and playing this deck? You made it to the top four. You won one of the games. I couldn't find the video for the top four. You beat Cohen. I guess you lost the top four, obviously, but maybe you can kind of go into kind of your thought process for this deck.
Yeah. Before that, let
Sure.
me add a disclaimer.
Yeah.
So whenever you are in a top 8 or top 4, decks are more specifically chosen and tailored for who your opponents are going to be.
Sure.
And so this is not necessarily what I'd recommend someone play. So if I recall in that event, what they did is they had a big open event on GIMP. You throw up a table for that league, the retro tournament,
Yeah.
and you play someone random, whoever else was click join on your table, or you joined a table, and then you play. I want to say it was 10 games. You played 10 games, and they took the 8 people with the best records from that, and then those 8 made the cut, and then they made a top 8 bracket from that based on their order of 1 to 8, and so in that open field, the decks that I played were ROPS and Throne Room, and it was not like Hayes Trooper ROPS. It was Walter ROPS that used reacting ATSTs.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I played reacting ATST ROPS, and I played Throne Room Careful Planning with nudges. There's 2 variants of Throne Room that are popular in that meta, and the other one starts heading for the medical and uses Insurrection to pull docking bays and
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I use the Careful Planning nudge version. So
Yeah.
those are the 2 decks that I actually think are probably the best in the format. They're my favorite. Those are what I used. I think I went 9-1. I think all the top 8 had to go 9-1 or better to make the top 8. So a few people went 10-0, a few people went 9-1. I don't recall exactly. I think I went 9-1 with those 2 decks. And I think if there were a big open field like that, those are the 2 decks I would play to qualify, because I think they're the best. So we'll start with that. But now let me pivot to this ISB and why I chose it and what I like about it. Because of who was in the top 8, and I don't recall everyone at the time, but it was myself and Hayes, and we were planning together. And then Bastion and Desai, Kuhn, like you said, I played in the round of 8. Some other players. I tend to like to pivot decks. I don't tend to like to play my deck and then let people go, I know that he's playing that, so I'm gonna play a deck that beats it. I didn't want people to have scouted that I just played Throne Room and ROPS a bunch in my 10 games and then go, all right, I'm matched up against Joe, I'm gonna play decks that beat those.
Sure.
So I like to pivot. I think ISB is a deck that is very good for match play. It's just it's not ever going to lose by a lot. Like it puts out cards, damage. It slows down their damage between resistance, which also is key for inserts, to cap damage from inserts to 2. Between Imperial Decree, which shuts off their force stream bonuses, your objective that makes their damage, their drains -1 when you're flipped. Other objective.
Yeah, sorry, confused you.
That one also makes it -1.
Yeah.
-1 when you're flipped. You just end up shutting down a lot of damage. So even if you do lose, you're not losing by a bunch. And then you have the option to sort of kind of lock them out with that, where you've got, let's say, you're playing against Prophet and you've got a walker at Jabba's palace, and it's got ISB agents on it, and it's all loaded up, and they're flipped, and they've got the audience chamber with a Jedi, Ben Kenobi with a lightsaber, and they're flipped. And sorry, you're trying to frantically bring up a bunch of cards.
No, it's fine. That's all good. I do this all to introduce. Yeah, you're fine. That's all good.
Cool. So they're sitting in there, and their objective's flipped, and they're pinging 1. But then you've got Imperial Decree that's turning off that lightsaber bonus, and you've got your objective that's making the site train -1, and so they're just getting one damage in from the ping of their objective, and then you're retrieving that with the flip side of your objective. You've essentially locked them out from doing any damage, and then you're draining in space because you're at 2 systems for decree, and you are draining, and maybe two trains, and maybe you're draining in Jabba's palace, and so it's a deck that is just a very solid sort of slow rolling juggernaut. It's very difficult to deal with for some decks.
Makes sense.
The weakness of it, I would say, is that it is slow. It's slow to set up. If you're light side, you don't want to let them get to that point of inevitability where they can lock you out. So you want to start doing faster damage. You want to pick and choose battles where you're, knocking them. If they don't get all their ISB agents at once to flip, if you can keep knocking some off the table to not let them get to that 4, that's helpful. If you can get a spy, they're a lot of times going to be going to the executor docking bay to get plus activation with mob points. If you can get in a spy and beat up, because their plan is try and get Commander Marajik. So the idea is, the setup of it is you start with the Coruscant system and arrest order mobilization points, and then a third effect depending on what you're seeing. You cannot hide forever if you're expecting inserts, or oppressive enforcement if you're expecting sense of alter. And you use one of your Imperial commands to pull Admiral Piet, because it can pull an admiral, and Admiral Piet can pull a commander. So you deploy him for 2 to the executor docking bay that you pull with Imperial arrest order. He pulls Commander Marajik, and Commander Marajik can pull your systems. So you've got this pull chain that you get out your systems, and then you start deploying your ships, and then eventually you get a walker and you put a bunch of guys on there. It takes a while, but if you're light side, if you get a spy, you can jump on Marajik or Piet there at the executor dock. That's a good line to take against it. Yeah, that's basically that ISB in a nutshell.
No, thank you for that. And would you say you kind of did this partially because of what your opponents were playing, what they expect you to play? I mean, in your mind, was this like an anti-TRM, anti-profit deck, and you thought those might be popular, that therefore I should also play this because, profits don't always, or I mean, TRMs don't always have a lot of space, potential, and they want to battle you on the ground a lot, like with their, lightsaber people. And you're like, well, I'm not going to have people on the ground unless it's in like an ATSD. Was that kind of your thought, or what was it?
Yeah, that and Mind What You've Learned is the other big light deck, and it a lot of times relies on, inserts, or it has goofy things like that. But if you can, it turns off your force train bonuses, so you're not going to get that from the objective or from your Kashyyyk system. But indoor, just being a drain of 2, if you can, being able, so a deck like that doesn't have systems, let's say like a Bring 'em Before Me deck, paying to drain, and maybe they're only draining at 1 or 2 locations. The fact that it can go to indoor, it can go to your indoor docking bay, and then go to another system and just be like drain 2, drain 1, drain 1. Just start getting solid damage in through any sort of like through battle plan, through Jedi Test 1. Just it's just a deck that allows you to play your game.
I like it. Makes sense. And yeah, and you beat Cohen with this. Cohen was playing a TRM deck. And it looks like eventually went to space, and you were able to get a whole bunch of your ships and kind of overpower him. This deck, you did kind of inspire. Let me make another one of these. You did kind of inspire N-Rabbit in 2024, and he kind of inspired him. And so I like to see what you think about him, because he also made the um, top one as well. So his was similar to yours, but a little bit different. So yeah, he was doing a similar thing, but he wasn't trying to go on ground. So you had an indoor docking bay, you had 2 ATSTs, he tried to do a little bit more tech. Like he added like a homing beacon and things. I'm just curious what you think. Do you think he made an improvement on what you did, or you think it's like just a different deck, or just curious what you think? Look at his deck compared to yours.
Um, the hard part the reason why that's hard to answer is because I don't know what meta or people he was expecting. Sometimes doing a sellout. So I would say this version sells out more in terms of it's much more spaced up. So looking at some of the stuff he added, so there was already like Twilight for lateral damage for space power. And I think there was already an I've lost R2. Can you flip back over
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
sec?
yeah, yeah. You had an I lost R2, correct? You had an I
Uh,
lost R2. Yeah,
yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, but he added in a gravity shadow. He added in a an overload,
Yes.
um, projective telepathy, the homing beacon. It's much more has more space blowout between the homing beacon and the gravity shadow. The blast door controls to turn off barrier. And so if he was based on his opponents expecting like, you know, they're just going to just if it's just going to be a space fight, then I completely see making these changes. The I like the Solist ad as another system because, like I said, it's one that's unaffected by Jedi Test One, so
Yeah.
it's just a 2/2. You know, if you go to indoor and you go to Solist, um, the I do still prefer having a docking bay and some walkers in general, absence of any other information of knowing who's going to be or what meta I'm expecting. Just because, like against Mind, which you have learned, if they're like wars not make one great, battle plan, and you're paying 4 for your drains, and they've got aim high, so you're paying 1 to retrieve with your objective, and you know you can kind of choked. And when you don't have to pay that 3 for battle plan, it just makes your life a lot happier because you're not making the choice between draining and deploying that turn. There's basically Star Wars. There's 3 things you can do with your force. You with battle plan as a thing. You can pay to drain, you can deploy things, or you can draw. And a lot of times where people get in trouble is they're not good at choosing the balance of these 3 things, and it's typically the draw one that they struggle with, because what happens is they're like, well, I need to do damage, so they pay to drain, and then they're like, well, I need to deploy stuff, and so they deploy, and then they used up all their force, and then over a couple turns their hand size gets really low, and then they just don't have options, and that's when their opponents can take advantage of that. And so it's a tricky balance of deciding where you're using your force between those 3 things. Sometimes it's you just forego draining so you can deploy and draw. Sometimes you take a turn off from deploying, but it's part of the balance of the game is figuring that out. And if you don't have to because you're in both space and ground, so draining is free, then it frees up a lot more force to be able to, after you deploy, still draw cards to do things the next turn. So I do generally, as a play style, prefer to be in both space and ground. Um,
Yeah, that
and
makes
then the
yeah.
walkers also just have that advantage of being able to camp on their location with a bunch of forfeit fodder inside and make all their drains across that planet -1 is I feel like a very big advantage for ISB that you're leaving on the table. Go all space version. But again, there are definitely times where I've done all space versions like this, where you're like, I'm just going to lean into the space, and I'm just going to pay. You know, they're not, especially if you're like, I don't expect them to have any space at all, and you can just go like ship, ship, ship. I'm just paying 9 every turn, and I got Chiranu out, and I'm draining you 3/3/2, 3/3/2. You know, take 8, take 8, take 8. I don't even, so yeah, it's an interesting take, and it depends on what you're expecting to face.
Yeah, I guess I thought it was interesting because I mean I agree with you that it's nice to get people here, and if you can get kind of a bunch of ISP agents, if you can get like a evacs in here like with forfeit 7, I guess it's just the issue that you have decks like TRM where they'll try to get you like Leia with blaster, right? Or they'll try to get Han with blaster, and they'll try to they'll really try to, like, stack up the destinies, get a ton of power. They'll do like Jedi Knight Luke, right? Um, and decks like TRM, they use these mains, like they'll use like Or Marco. It depends on the deck. Some some don't, right? Depending on it. It's just that I think like decks like TRM, they tend to, now granted you beat a TRM deck, right? And so I guess maybe I'd like to understand more of like how you're able to keep indoor, or like would there be a game where it's okay, well my plan was to deploy indoor docking bay and I wanted to put ATST here, but man, TRM's strong, so I'm just gonna, not do my ground plan, or help me understand that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's always an option. You don't have to deploy it, or you don't have to deploy it until you're ready. You can build up the executor docking bay and then play it and move over. One So I guess the argument is like if you deploy your indoor docking bay and your walker and stuff, you give them something to do. You give them
Right.
a place to go and do something against you. But um, you're also forcing them to spend resources to do that. And if they're spending all these resources fighting you over this docking bay while you're draining two with the core system and two with the caching system, you're kind of okay with that. Uh, as opposed to having to deal with if you weren't giving them that to do, and then they were like Falcon with Han and Leia and battle and grab and sense your command and then blow you out in space, then you end up in a scenario where that might be worse for you than just letting them fight over this 1-0 docking bay or 1-1 docking bay. One other thing is spaceport dock, and it actually, looking at this list, it kind of surprises me that spaceport docking bay is not in here, because that's a lot of times a perpetual card, because you can throw that on their planet even if they have interior sites. Now that's maybe less common in this meta, but throw that on their planet or throw it next to Kessel or Kashyyyk or whatever, and I don't remember all the restrictions of where spaceport docking bay, but you can throw it, of course, on whatever.
Yeah,
And
you can deploy
if they take over the indoor docking bay, then you just transit away, and now you're draining two there, and they have to pay a ton to transit away from indoor, and follow you. And so if you've got a place that you can just kind of run back and forth, and they got a docking bay transit over and follow you, and that meanwhile makes your drains free, and it's a drain of two if they're not contesting it because of your objective. Yeah, I think having the option to go to ground without the walkers, there's just basically no. You can't just throw a couple ISB, a couple outer rim scouts down and not have them get slaughtered. So, um,
I
yeah, I guess
agree.
that's
Yeah,
that's the response.
yeah, they're prime targets. I agree. I guess my biggest concern, and I know this isn't such a big deal in the open formats, but you have like order to engage, right? And so order to engage, they really punish you for not starting battles. And so like this list, you don't have like a point man, right? You don't have a point man that would cancel order to engage.
Yeah,
You don't have an
but
alter.
worst case scenario, you can just shuttle the walker up from the indoor docking bay to a ship up at indoor system. You eat order to engage for one turn and shuttle up, and then they just deploy the whole beat force and they battle you, and and then you lose some guys. You can either battle back into them and just lose them all and not lose to order to engage, or you can shuttle them all up. If it's the executor, or even if it's not, you can eventually the executor and then move it back down to the executor docking bay and then move it out somewhere else, especially if you have that spaceport docking bay. And the other thing is, like, you can sit Vader and Tarkin inside a walker, and Vader can choke on from inside, and Tarkin can cancel one of their destinies. And yeah, so you have options. It's
True.
it's a little more flexible. The other one is a little less flexible, but it's also one of those things where it's like against a deck where you're expecting order to engage, you might play it differently. But a deck that's against hidden base, right? I'm super glad to have that site, because then I can go down, I can get a walker and an outer rim scout there or whatever. Not a hidden base mains, but like a hidden base with ships,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
space based hidden
yeah.
base. Um, I can go to that docking bay. I can be draining two there because it's +1 with my objective, and all my drains are free. And now all my force is being used on deploying ships and moving around and drawing, and not all. There's no like, okay, do I need to make that choice of draining or drawing or battling and moving this turn, that sort of thing against them? Because against hidden base, it would have to be like, all right, pay 3 to drain it indoor, deploy a ship over here, you barrier, okay, I move my ships, and now I don't have as much force to draw, versus just drain free 2 on the ground, drain free in space, do things.
No, that's a good point. Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
yeah.
like I said, but if you're not expecting any hidden base, the docking bay loses some value. So how are you building the deck, and are you building it for a top 8 where you can put people on more specific decks? Are you building it for more open field? I'd always prefer the more flexible version for a more open environment.
Okay. I like your points. And in hindsight, obviously, you said that you wanted to kind of protect yourself a little bit against, Mind Wave of Learn with Great Warrior. Would you have, if you were going to like remake this today, would you, take out maybe Kashyyyk for Sullust or Kessel for Sullust? Because Sullust is, a drain of 2. Versus that, would you decide to do a Kifex? Well, but Kifex is too far away. You can't get Executor there. Would you change those choices, or would you leave them the same?
Yeah, there is something to be said for your opponent icons. So that's Kashyyyk and Kessel, and Kessel's deploy -1.
Yeah.
Yes, though if I were expecting Mito True Learn, which I think is one of the better decks in the format, I think Sullust is a great addition, and would probably lean towards um, putting it in over Kashyyyk
Okay.
and keeping Kessel's deploy modifier. And Kessel just replacing their Kessel is a nice force choke against deck.
I mean, yeah, you replace their Kessel, you get rid of the force drain +1, and then you make them have to get 6. Is it that big a deal? Like, does this
Well, you
minus
don't give them
one?
a +1. Lightside Kessel is a drain 3 for them, and this is only a drain 2. So
Okay, and that was a factor in you choosing Kessel, is what you're saying. Like you would try to hold back Kessel,
yeah,
waiting
and
for them
then
to
in the
deploy.
deploy -1, just a 2-1 system that's deploy -1. They have to have 6 ability to go there. So that's kind of annoying for them sometimes with Super Falcon. They usually have 6 because they're playing around, or 7 because they're playing around Zuckuss and Mist Hunter, but not always.
Okay.
That's one other thing I noticed, is the ship difference between the 2 decks. I've got, he has,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
oh,
7.
okay. It was just,
Yeah, he didn't
okay,
make
never
much
mind.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was
I
about the
was just
same.
reading words.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts on playing this deck, pile this deck for others? Maybe like what to hold in your hand versus deploy. You said it was kind of slow, so obviously you're trying to get this chain of Piet to Marajek at the Executor docking bay, and probably deploying Fondor, deploying Executor, getting them off this docking bay as fast as possible. I'm assuming, so they don't like gank you and deploy spy and kill your 2 guys. I'm assuming here.
Yeah. 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 And that might look like getting executed Fondor and moving them onto the bridge. It might look like deploying a walker with them and then putting them on board and moving them out to the indoor docking bay. But yeah, you definitely got to be wary of a beatdown on them. You in theory, if you're losing a lot to that, you can just add in a Gick. It already plays Masterful Move, so has a puller for it. You can, if you're losing to beatdowns, that's an option. But I think you can generally play around to that. And yeah, just follow that setup. Try and establish a walker with some guys and a ship with some guys, and then start spreading out or picking and choosing. If 5d6 goes to their locations to make their drains -1, U3PO goes to make their drains to block a drain. Den of Thieves goes down to cancel a drain. Outer Rim Scout each turn. So you've got so much damage mitigation between those various things. Um, don't worry, don't panic play and fold to pressure, because you are going to start behind because you're slower, but eventually you're going to be like, all right, cancel a drain with Den of Thieves, block a drain with U3PO, retrieve a Rim Scout with my objective, and eventually you'll get into a board state where they're suddenly not doing much or any damage, and you are pushing through 4 or 5 damage a turn and rapidly catch up and win.
Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the rationale, and I think players will appreciate that. I want to go towards kind of the light side deck you used. So the deck you played in that top 8, you were playing a TRM with a home one and lots of senses. You had 5 senses. I know Hayes loves to run 7 senses in his TRM, but you ran 5, and you ran a restricted deployment, which you don't see a whole lot, which I thought was cool, right? So it seems like you're kind of extending the force choke, because the only dark side icons you would give would be via your Kessel. That's it in your deck. You ran the standard TRM Nudj deck. Maybe you can kind of talk about this deck and your rationale and kind of go from there.
Yeah. So restricted deployment is good against a lot of decks in when you're already choking, like against ROPS or well, I'm not sure what else at the moment, but maybe it'll come to me. You're probably not even deploying your Kessel. You're giving them 0 icons, and you've got a few different spies between Tycho and Lieutenant Blount, and so if they're relying on any sort of mobilization points at a non-battleground docking bay, you can try and jump on them and get a beat down. And so you've got Gunite also that helps choke, and you've got Revolution that can help choke, and so this is a more chokey build than it's not, again, the one that I played in qualify for the top 8, which was a more balanced version, but this one is just more of a I would say this is more fun. I guess it depends on if you like cheese. But just that I'm gonna choke, and then the premise is I've got my various mains between Luke, Hans, Leia's, Obi's to go beat you up. I'm gonna use my force advantage, right? Because there's just so many Twixes in here. You will hopefully get some early on. You've got also 3 tunnel visions that help you find what you need. And then, so the idea is I'm going to go beat you up with mains. I'm going to choke you real hard. And as an alternate win condition, like versus something like Bring Him, I've got that Kessel and Home One, and I can dig those out with those tunnel visions. And I can set up, Wedge and Tycho aboard, which will let me cancel a Destiny. And if needed, I can put Han and Leia and Luke and whatever. If it's against a space deck, I can pile them all on. And so if you are against a space deck, typically what you're going to do is just kill your nudges at your swamp and your farm, and then start draining there with your lightsabers, and then use and run around with Home One, and hopefully stack Home One super hard so that they don't want to battle it, and you can order to engage. But if they do want to battle it, because they get if they get a huge stack of ships, then you can just run away. And you've got altars which can cancel. I've lost R2. They can cancel lateral damage. That way you don't get trapped. You've got you can sense gravity shadow. So those are the sort of space tricks that you might run afoul of, but you have the senses and altars to cover those. And and then beyond that, it's like go battle them. It's less of the ISB was like do this order of operations. It was like command into Piet, into Merigic, pull your systems, get a walker, put them on board, move them out, get ship up, like follow this sort of set of instructions. And this deck is much less that. This light side is more like wide open of how you approach it. And it's going to be, against a space deck, like I said, you're going to go to the ground and drain. Against a Bring 'em deck, you're going to want to find your Kessel and set up trains. Against ROPS, you're going to go attack them, and you're probably going to go to Carida or Rendili or whatever system they play. Kashyyyk, you're not even going to play your Kessel. You're just going to go deploy your ship to there, and maybe even move it into Raltier to flip them back at some key point, or maybe Revolution Raltier, a revolution, a key, roll to your site. But basically, and then you're going to go attack them with mains and get a stack and do that order to engage that you referred to earlier. And yeah, that's the premise of this deck.
Absolutely. And so yeah, you have the weapon levitation and you have the gift of the mentor. So it seems like, obviously the primary goal is to get your ones out, get your force get your lightsabers out, right? So you can force drain if need be. Um, how how did this deck perform? So you beat Cohen, you beat a Rops deck. I saw that, and like it seemed like you're just being like you had like Luke at a site, and you're just kind of moving back and forth, as needed, and eventually he conceded. Do you remember how the other games kind of went with this deck, and any other like tips on piloting this against top players or anything?
I don't remember. I don't recall the exact decks. I think if someone wanted to play this deck, um, the key unique selling proposition of this deck is that force choke. It's the restricted deployment combined with Unite, combined with all the Twixes. And so if you are looking at the deck, that's the angle that you wouldn't want to change. Like in terms of like, oh, well, that's a lot of Twixes. Let me cut some of those out and add in the Cantina because that gives me a place to drain for 2 at and stuff. Because then at that point you're just like undercutting the point of the whole choke thing. But it's also totally fine to cut restricted deployment and cut back on a Twix or 2 and just try and play a more standard build. This is sort of a little bit more trolley build, I would say. I think it was chosen just because this looks more fun to me than a standard throne room.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you have restricted deployment. I mean, some promos do like out of commission, right? They might do like maybe one. You
Yeah,
had
there's
one,
one.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, they might do a couple of these because they're trying to out of commission a Vader, right? They're trying to, maybe get a like a Lord Vader or whatever from a hunt down deck dead, or even maybe a bring before me hunt, deck dead. Some of them like run what's it called, disarmed, right? Right, so they
mm-hmm.
can nullify some of the advantage of the dark side. Um, and maybe with a docking bay version, that would make more sense to do here. But I mean, no, I like the fact that you kind of push in the force choke. You do have kind of the I know, so you are kind of like setting up, Han and Leia, to do their either on ground or in space, which I think is cool. Um, I would say there could be a potential weakness if you're facing like a Rops like Kevin Shannon's where they'll play like Wakulumi, and they don't play like this Kashyyyk. Like if they don't give you a system to deploy to, you might only be able to deploy to Kessel because I don't think you can deploy this with your Tycho at the same time or a Blount because I think it has a permaplata. So I
Right.
think you're
So
really
if they're not
yeah,
playing their own like spaceport docking bait or altar, if they are, then you can deploy Lando there
true.
and fly it up. But
That's true.
they're probably not.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. You're right. Yeah, you
but
could do
but
that.
that but I think that's okay because then they're not in space. So what happens in that scenario where Raltier does not deploy a battlegun system is you have battle plan out and um, they pay 3 to drain 1 and you pay 3 to drain 2. You take over one of their sites or several of their sites. Ideally, you want to keep them from being flipped.
Yeah.
If they do flip, then you're paying to drain 1 and they're paying to drain 1, but you have a lot more force. Um, so so you've got Luke down with Saber, and maybe you throw Anakin Saber on Leia, and you're paying to it's +1 from the Saber, -1 from their objective, and you're paying to drain 1, and they're paying to drain 1, and but they're more choked, and then you have order to engage and that sort of thing. Point Man is not immune to sense, right?
Point man is not immune to sense. No, point man is
Yeah.
vulnerable to
So
sense, so that's
so
the disadvantage. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can sense Point Man and just have order to engage and just be in their face. So you're getting 3 free damage there, and I think Rops that is on the ground completely, you're fine just like throwing your guys all over their sites and battling and clash and gift to the mentor. I know, sorry about the mess, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. No, sorry about the mess is a good thing because some decks neglect this, but you kind of need it for any undercover spies or issues like that, or even against a Vader. And I guess the other thing I would say is, of course, you talk about lots of Twixes. So some advice people say is like slow play a little bit until you get all the Twixes in your hand, because you don't want to be drawing them for your weapon destinies things. Is that what you agree with, or any opinions on that?
No, I would say, bad destinies happen. You need to make plays at optimal times. And you're going to you can check your reserve deck every turn looking for a creature with the farm. And so you're gonna generally know your probabilities. You're gonna know, what your chance to hit Vader is, or do you need to swing it at other random guy instead? You're going to know, you might draw 0 for Destiny. And there's too many Twixes to eventually get them all, unless you're burning tunnel visions on them, which, I might do that once early, but I wouldn't want to late game be like, oh, I just want to get a 0 out of the deck. I'd want a more impactful card. So there will be zeros, and you're just gonna have to try and play around it and eventually track cards. The downside of this is there are not a lot of recyclable. It just has a 1 out of commission basically, and that's it. A weapon lev, and a signal. But otherwise, you don't really have these used destinies that you can recycle and track, as if you had 3 or 4 out of commissions. So you just have to track naturally based on, all right, I drew these destinies, now I know where those are.
Understood. Makes sense. And when it comes to cards like Gift of the Mentor or things like that, are you holding this? Like, how do you choose when to hold this and when to kind of like wait to kind of like stack it in like one big, attack kind of thing?
Yeah. Generally depends on the matchup. Like if it's I'm going against a deck where it's going to be a race, then I'm just playing it right away to get out a saber and start draining. If it's against a deck where we're battling, a bring in before me deck maybe. Of course, Luke would probably be captured in that, but we might have a battle where he's not. I might be saving it for adding battle destinies. Generally, I would probably just use it to get a saber. I think Luke with his saber is just so much scarier than trying to wait for the battle where Luke is in the battle and Obi, and they're trying to save it for a perfect battle. I think if you're already having Luke and Obi in a battle and they're both swinging and they're both doing stuff, like you're probably already fine. And having that saber is already doing something good in that battles, and also does it when Obi's not there. So I generally would pull a saber with it, but obviously with 2 sabers you might already have one, and then it opens up the alternate text.
I like it. I like it. Any last thoughts on your TRM deck that you played?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways. I think that's sort of the beauty of the game. What I was talking about earlier, how complex it is. Like this takes it in this interesting force choke direction, but you can also remove all that, and you can, or you can switch it over to a docking bay version, or you can, like this one has Kessel to as an alternate win condition, but like a lot of them don't. It's sort of like this one feels very much like, as I look at it, I'm like, yeah, this seems fun to me, but you can basically make your own flavor, and that's what I like about Star Wars. Is whether it's with a Thronum deck or a Prophet deck or whatever, there's so many different ways to play, and there's a lot of different viable stuff. So it's just like explore, try out different things, and find what you like.
I agree, and I think Hayes referred to Star Wars like as an unsolvable game, right? There's always variants and things you can change up, and I agree with you. Like there's always value to some tweaking, whether just from experience and or just what you think your opponent's going to play. So no, that's a huge part what makes the game fun, and cool. Well, I think it's been a good discussion, and Joe, really appreciate your kind of trip down memory lane, your thoughts on kind of Star Wars today and in the past. and I think people will really love and appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting these and creating them for the community.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, sir. All right. Take care.